the national coach of Malaysia. Coach Chris, currently the head coach of Malaysia, he has 30 years of experience as a coach and was head coach of Pedi Aquatic USA for many years. He has produced many Olympic swimmer in USA. Coach Chris has also been a FINA lecturer and a wonderful human being. We welcome Coach Chris. The stage is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. It's great to be a part of this massive project that you've undertaken. I've been telling everyone that I really think your reaction to COVID-19 is first among all countries in the world to get this many people to learn every day. I've got a lot to cover, so I'm just going to kind of jump in there. When I teach classes on coaching, one of the things that people seem to be the most nervous about is the idea of energy systems. Mainly because whenever they see this in swimming literature, there's always charts and lines and numbers that go up and down, and people think that they have to memorize this to get somewhere in swimming. I'm trying to simplify what is in people's mind when they start to think about how to train with energy systems, so I'm going to start there. Energy systems is just a word, a phrase for describing what all human beings have, which is for us to do absolutely everything we do, walk around, we need an energy supply to keep our body going. What most people know about is that the food we eat gets turned into calories and our body uses that to do different things. Now, way back, millions and millions of years ago, we evolved some responses to different things we had to do in the environment. And those things are just part of nature. We as humans have a little bit different evolution than other animals, and so we have different systems that respond to our different needs. All right? So I'm going to talk about when mainly we talk about energy systems, we think about three different responses that humans kind of have. Now, if any of you have small kids, if you were sitting somewhere and you saw a small child ready to fall and you had to jump to catch it, or if you have to jump out of the way of a moving object, you have what they call a phosphogenic response. You use something called ATP-CP, adenotriosphine and creatine phosphate. And I'm going to represent that with this little bottle here. All right? This is high-powered energy that we've evolved to move fast, to move quickly for a few seconds, basically to save our lives. All right? And when we do that, this is, as you can tell, this is like a little bottle of hand sanitizer. They're all around everywhere. But if I squeeze this really hard, big amounts of energy, it'll only last for a short period of time. And it's a powerful bit of energy. And when I let go of the bottle, the energy kind of comes back. It doesn't cost me too much, but it only lasts for a tiny, short period of time. All right? The second kind of response that we sort of have is if we have to do fight or flight or move a big amount of power and our muscles have to really be exerted, we use what most people call as glycolytic energy, anaerobic energy. And I'm going to represent that with this cup here. Comparing the two, it's a bit bigger. All right? Now, the thing about anaerobic energy is we pay for it in a lot of calories, and it mainly comes from glycogen, the sugar that our muscles burn. Okay? And that has kind of a cost. And we can do it for longer than this, but we measure it in terms of 30, 40, 50 seconds, or even a minute and a half. All right? And finally, The third kind of energy that we use is if we've had to do something for a long period of time. And I've got to tell you, this is one of the two main evolutionary super advantages that humans got over the rest of the animal kingdom. The first was our brain size, and the second was our basis of having a large aerobic reaction. Now, you won't know this, but we are the fifth most aerobic mammal on planet Earth. The fifth most. We are more aerobic than a horse. If you drop a horse and me into the Gobi Desert, I will eat that horse. I'll be able to run longer, and it was an evolutionary reaction to hunting for food. So I will represent that with this bottle here, which is our aerobic energy. All right. Now, the difference between aerobic energy and anaerobic energy mainly is that this, and I always say for purposes of this discussion, let's call this petrol. All right. It uses oxygen in the air, and it reacts to our fat metabolism system, and we can go for long periods on this kind of fuel. This kind of fuel is burning sugar, all right, and it's going, straight, the sugar's burning around our muscles, and it's pretty much what we ate before that and our growth and our muscle density and the fibers that we have that decides how much power we can get from this kind of energy. And this comes from a very specific amount of chemicals that we have also in our muscles. Now, for the purpose of talking, and I am going to get there, we can we can measure our aerobic energy very, very easily. Because it burns oxygen, in the old experiments we used to do, we can use gas bags, and we have been able to measure what you've heard referred to as VO2 max. So whenever you hear scientists talk about aerobic measurements, they are very precise and almost very, very close to a direct measurement. However, with anaerobic energy, we can't measure it as it's happening. So what we do is we measure things with the waste products that it produces, lactic acid. And by measuring that, we make a determination of what has been used. So for sake of this, and because this only happens and we can't measure this at all, when most people are measuring anaerobic versus aerobic energy systems, they're going like this. They're taking this, putting it inside, and then we're measuring anaerobic here and aerobic here. I hope everyone's following that so far. All right, now, in terms of aerobic versus anaerobic energy, you will hear people refer to capacities and power. All right, now with capacity, we're talking about the size of the tank. How big is your tank and how much fuel, in this case aerobic fuel, is inside. Likewise for anaerobic. Your anaerobic capacity is how big and how much anaerobic fuel you have in here. All right? Then they're going to refer to aerobic and anaerobic power. And my way of kind of describing that is the power is the size of the hole in the tank. Why this is important is because when you go to use the fuel in a perfect situation, you want to be able to use the fuel exactly for the length of the race. All right? So for aerobic energy, if you're running a marathon and you have a tank that's this high and you're going to use a lot of aerobic fuel, when you turn this over, blah, 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 blah. You want this to last for 2 hours. If this runs out before 2 hours, you didn't have enough either aerobic capacity or aerobic power to last that long. If you finish the race of a 1500 and you still have this much fuel left, then you did too much aerobic training, either in capacity and power, and you left some in the race. Likewise, if you're swimming a 50 freestyle, anaerobic energy is more like jet fuel. Boom, you blast it and it goes. So if you go to turn this over, and after 18 seconds, this is over, and you still have 3 more meters, you didn't have enough anaerobic capacity, or you had maybe even too much anaerobic power, and it didn't last for the whole race. So your goal is to manage these 2 systems, actually these 3 systems, but really these 2, in order that you use the proper mixture of fuels for the right amount of time, so that when your race is done, you've used everything that you put into training and that you have nothing left. And that is the idea about energy systems. Now, the problem is, not the problem, but the thing is, from country to country, people use different levels of measuring these energy systems because we don't know exactly when you change from one to the next. We have a general idea, but as you know, as you may or may not know, what I'm going to show you in a few minutes is that different national systems use different measures of the energy systems, and we're going to talk about some of those in a few minutes. But to me, when I'm teaching coaches, if you understand that basic idea that I just explained, you'll be able to plug in whatever you need to plug in to write better workouts that are going to match the goals that you have for your swimmer. Okay? So with that in mind, let's see if I can move this first slide. You want to think about, how do I go backwards now? Well, I'm going to skip that. All right, if you want to think about how you're going to plan your training for a season. Now, for me, I plan my season week by week. We obviously have a long-term plan, but when I write the workouts, I write them, usually I write on a Saturday, and I write Monday, Tuesday, I have Sunday off. So on a Saturday, I see what has happened at the end of the week, and I write my sessions for Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. After Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, I evaluate what I've seen, and then I write for Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. All right? And the reason I do that is because I also want to pay attention to what has happened in writing the next workouts that are going to come next. All right? And when I'm writing, practices and thinking about energy, I'm trying to match workouts that are going to match the goals of the physiological state and the development part of where my athlete is to get to their swimming goals. I have a long-term plan, I have a weekly plan, and I know where the athlete is on the development continuum, and week by week, I'm moving them up on that continuum to be the best swimmer they can be whenever the championship meet is going to be. And how I do that is I'm going to create sets where the number of repeats, the speed achieved, and the amount of rest given will determine the energy system that I am using. Okay? Now, what you're looking at on your screen right now is the training categories, I should call them, I don't know if they still use them, but these are the old training categories of United States swimming. And what you'll see is, and at the end, I'll show you this again, so I don't have to get super deep into it, but there's recovery at the bottom. There are 3 aerobic systems, which they call EN1, EN2, and EN3, and there are 3 anaerobic systems, which they call SP1, SP2, and SP3. And in this little handy chart that we used to get way back in the day, it shows you the heart rate that you will probably entertain when you're in those zones. There's a column there for the work to rest ratio. There's a column for the velocity, the speed that you're going. And there's another column for the probable amounts of lactate that you're going to produce. And then there is some ideas for set duration, repeat distance, and examples of sets. This is the system that was kind of brought out in America in the 1980s. As I always say is, let me see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sort of levels there. I think the Russians have 12, the Australians have 7, the Brits had 7, which they moved to 5. So these aren't hard and fast rules. But again, if you sort of stick with what I showed you in the beginning, you have an idea of, you know, where you are. All right, the next slide is the British swimming energy zones, energy systems and training zones. And if you notice, they've got some nice colors there where they basically work on zones. Green is, there's a green and a blue in the aerobic zone. And the color codes, I really like those because in green, you could sort of do that without any risk to yourself, to the athlete, I should say. When you get into the blue zone, which is at the misnamed anaerobic threshold, but at your highest steady state pace aerobically, you know, as long as you go there, you're not stressing the athlete. But if you notice, and this is why I put this slide up there, in the red zone, you have what they call the aerobic power zone, which in the USA swimming was EN3. And this is swimming at VO2 max. And what I want to say to you development coaches is, over the years, I've heard a lot about overtraining of swimmers. And if usually, I'd say 8 times out of 10, when you have a swimmer that has developed some kind of overtraining, it is usually because they've trained in that red zone too much without enough recovery. Now, you might think that, oh, but it's still an aerobic pace, you know, you're getting rest. What happens is, once you go above lactate steady state pace into your super high aerobic speeds, you're not just burning this kind of energy, it's leaking into here. And if you do that too much and without enough recovery, your body starts to eat itself. And that is where the problems come. Again, in the British categories then, when you move out of red, you go into the gold speeds, where the speeds are higher, but what is built into those higher speeds is you cannot swim at high anaerobic paces without the body recovering. It kind of just won't do it. And you won't get the times that you've initially gotten without the rest being appropriate. So in a way, I mean, you can still beat up a swimmer by giving them too much sprinting, but the organism somewhat protects itself when doing that. Now, I could put up the Russian system, the Hungarian system, everyone else's system, but I'm not really going to do that because, you know, I just put up the two systems that I've worked with because I used to be the head coach of Scotland. I used to be the British junior development coach. So between the American system and the British system, that's what I've worked with. Okay? All right. Now, I'm going to go back to the American system and start to describe some parameters for energy training. All right. If you see what I was on this next slide is, those are the six, on the right is the six energy systems as divided, you know, in our system, EN1, EN2, EN3, SP1, SP2, SP3. And then what we've done is distance swimmers, middle distance swimmers, and sprint swimmers, we show the different lengths of sets, that you might want to do in working these things. So sprinters, to work on their basic aerobic endurance, they only need to do smaller sets. And obviously distance swimmers, in order to get that system to work, there is a certain amount of work that has to happen. For example, in EN1, and actually even EN2, pretty much you need 30 minutes of work for that system really to be engaged enough to improve. All right? But if you look at the other end, SP2, for that system to improve, you only need to be doing, you know, 4, 5, 6 minutes of total swimming broken up into pieces. All right? So when you see those numbers are not repeats. Those numbers are lengths of the sets for this to happen. So even if you're only having a 90-minute practice, you know, if you're going to work on a system of practice or two systems of practice or even three systems of practice, you can pick from there. You might want to do, you know, some EN2 work today for 25 or 30 minutes. Then you want to do some SP work for SP2 work for 20 minutes and some SP3 work for, you know, 5 minutes. That's how it kind of works. Okay? Now, I'm going to go system by system with one exception here. All right. Your most basic system, main aerobic system, you're working below the anaerobic threshold. All right, which means you are as you're swimming, any lactic acid waste product that you're producing while you're swimming is being taken away. In using this, when you're swimming, oxygen's coming into you and you're swimming, and that is the main fuel that's happening. You're using fat metabolism. The repeats are usually, for a set like that, will be 200 meters and higher. The rest times between however long you stop, between 20 and 30 seconds. And the heart rate you're going to use is between 130 and 150 beats per minute. All right, the goal of low aerobic swimming is to swim amounts just before anaerobic threshold and use fat metabolism as energy. For top juniors, you want sets to be at least 30 minutes long or longer. I'm sorry to say that once you have hormones, for your aerobic system to really develop, it has to work for 30 minutes. The results are, and this is important. Now, I heard, I guess it was the head coach Partha yesterday talking about your muscle fibers. And he didn't go into it very specifically, but your muscle fibers, even the fast twitch and the slow twitch, they both burn both parts of fuel. They just do it. They both have an aerobic and an anaerobic part, even though they do very different things. So when you are doing low aerobic swimming, you're increasing your general endurance and the oxygen carrying capacity of all muscle fibers. Now, mainly the slow twitch ones. But by doing that, it allows better glycogen and ATP storage in your fast twitch muscles. Just like I said before, if you do low aerobic swimming, your body gets used to burning energy, and that saves glycogen energy for these two. All right? Obviously, like I said before, more work, more volume in aerobic for the distance swimmers, less for the swimmers. When you get to steady state, now we're talking about going at anaerobic threshold, which really is your highest, is your almost highest aerobic pace. It's your highest aerobic pace without a cost, which means that you are at the highest level you can swim, where the lactate that you're producing is being taken away or minimized by the swimming that you're doing. All right? And that is usually, you know, that's your threshold pace. Repeats are usually from 100 to 400 meters. Rest times 20 to 50 seconds, sometimes longer. And the heart rate at 165 to 180. Now, the goal is to achieve lactate steady state velocity. And by doing that over time, and as you grow older, you will improve. The speed that you can do that will get faster and faster and faster until there comes a time when it won't. But with usually that's, you know, into people's 20s. Some people can get there, you know, can continue that longer. But from the time that you become post-pubertal, there is a window of aerobic development that will happen, and then that window will start to close off. Once you have that window is closed off, you won't be able, like there's no, even if I were to start marathon training now, I would never be as good a marathon or runner as I would have been if I would have started on time. All right, my window has closed. Now, the result is your improved ability to swim with an equilibrium of lactate production and removal. All right, now, to measure this happening, it is the average time for the set repeats, your threshold pace, that has determined whether the training effect is happening or not. If you do a set and they're averaging 109, and then 2 weeks later you do the same set and the average is 106 at the same heart rate, then you know that you are improving your threshold speed. Now, I put this at the bottom. There should be a caution that this is, with the sprinters, you got to be very, very careful about doing this, because with them, they want to keep up with their friends, and if their threshold is not very high and the guy in the next lane is higher, you don't necessarily want them to swim with that person, because if they do, they'll start swimming at VO2 max speed, and they may start eating into their glycogen system, and you don't want them to do that until you are telling them that they need to do that. Okay? All right, now, I'm not going to speak about EN3 yet. I'm going to save that for the end, because like I said, that was in the red zone. Now we go to the speed parts. All right, now, SP1 and SP2, that is true anaerobic training. This cup. All right, now, repeats for SP1 and SP2 are between 10 and 50 meters, depending on what kind of response you're trying to elicit. All right, long rest, and you want to return towards a rested state between bouts of work. And the work to rest ratio will probably be, you know, 1 to 6. You may get up to 1 to 6 work to rest ratio. Doesn't have to be 1 to 6. Be 1 to probably 1 to 1 or higher, 1 to 2, 1 to 3, 1 to 4, 1 to 5. And this will also depend on whether there are swim downs, how long of a rest you're going to give them, and what kind of speed times your swimmer is giving you compared to their best time. Some examples I put there is, if you're only going 15-meter sprints, you want to have 30 seconds rest. 25s, 40 seconds or more. 50s and 100s, several minutes. All right? Hundreds, and I'll get to this at the end. Hundreds on 1.5 or 2 minutes, that is not anaerobic training. All right, hundreds for a post puberty athlete. Hundreds on the 2 minutes, that is VO2 max training. All right, once you start to get to pure anaerobic training, the lactate level will rise, and then it has to fall again for you to get the desired effect. Goal of anaerobic training, SP1, SP2 training, is to improve maximum speed. You want to recruit new fast twitch muscles. You want to improve the buffering capacity, that is the capacity of the muscle to withstand stress, get a rest, and do it again. Get a rest and do it again. And also, you want to improve its ability to use speed for multiple bouts, to be able to do several races, several races one after each other and not be debilitated. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to improve rested speed, not fatigued speed. All right? Fatigued speed is more into the VO2 max and the return speed type training. Anaerobic training is about improving your rested speed for different lengths of the race, but your rested speed nonetheless. All right. Now, SP3 is special training speed. All right. And that, I didn't make a whole thing for that because we're mainly training this ATP CP thing. All right. And for me, the things I like to use are what I call surface push training, which is pushing right off on the surface and sprinting as hard as you can for only 10, 12 meters, 15 meters at the most. All right. Now, the reason I don't put that in the SP1, SP2 category is, and this is interesting, you're going faster, but you don't need as much rest. And that's because you're using the ATP-CP system, and it actually recovers faster than the glycogen system. Okay? All right. Now, in terms of writing any kind of workouts, these are some common set types and the training effects. What you obviously know are short rest intervals, descending sets, ascending sets. Short rest intervals are usually to stabilize some kind of training effect, usually high aerobic training. Descending sets are usually to, again, maintain a velocity and a certain energy system under increasing stress. Ascending sets are usually, you're now moving into anaerobic training, and what you're doing is you're managing the rise and fall of the waste products, the lactic acid in your body, and how that's going to affect your ability to recover. That's what ascending sets are. And then mixed sets and rotations are when you're trying to train for multiple parts of a race at the same time. You may have 2 anaerobic hits, some aerobic swimming, maybe some speed swimming, and that's a mixed set. You rotate that around 3 or 4 or 5 times around. And your body gets used to performing different things at the same time. Also, long repeats and sprints together. All right, I'm going to get all the way down here. All right, things you need to consider when planning your workouts. The biological age of your athletes. Early maturers achieve shorter distance times earlier, usually due to an early anaerobic capacity. All right, why the big kid is always that's at 12 or has a little mustache is better than the other kid is because they've grown earlier. But really why that happens is because they get born or they develop a bigger anaerobic tank earlier. Late maturers handle aerobic load better. And that's mainly because not so much that their capacity comes earlier, but because they don't have a lot of anaerobic capacity, their system of fat metabolism, it's almost like this isn't so big, but it has more fuel in it. So they seem to be late mature, seem to be able to handle aerobic loads better. Gender. The difference in flotation ability affects the cardiopulmonary system and a subsequent difference in heart rate. Females float better than males, all right, especially right around the times, well, before puberty, it's close to the same. After puberty, they actually float better. So the heart rates at certain speeds will be lower, all right? Whereas for male swimmers, their drag profile is a little bit heavier. And so when they're swimming at all speeds, the heart rates will be higher. All right. You need to consider also the body type of the athlete. As with everything in swimming, it's the golden ratio between the entire length of the boat, the length of the arms, length of the legs, the length of the torso, and all those measurements in between. And body weight will also be a factor in both aerobic and anaerobic training. Also, you want to consider people's previous training history. All right. If you get a new swimmer, you need to find out what they've done before. You need to find out about their life. Are they good at running? Are they really strong? What, did they used to do gymnastics, dance class, whatever? All these things are going to matter in terms of you being understand what kind of training history they've had before, what kind of aptitudes they've had before, and how you can better deal with that. All right, here's some sample construction tools for workout creation. For EN1 or EN2 sets, the length of the set, repeat distance, how much rest in between, heart rates, and the BBMs for those that I'm not talking to people, so is the beats per minute. Oh no, I'm sorry, BBM is beats below maximum, not beats per minute. I've been talking about beats per minute all the way up to now, but so it's 50 beats below your maximum. So when you know what your maximum heart rate is, and a low aerobic set is going to be about 50 beats below your max. All right. If you get to the high rates and people start swimming 20 to 30 beats below their maximum, you are now in, a bit where you need to pay attention to how much of that swimming you're doing within a week. Okay. And I'm going to share this with you all. So, I'm sure the questions are probably piling in about these different numbers. I will give this to Mr. Chakshi, and he can share that with you if you so desire. Okay. All right. When you're writing a set, you need to be thinking, what type of adaptation are you trying to do? What energy system are you trying to stimulate? And it could be one or two energy systems. Once you're doing that, you want to think, how long do I want the set to last? How far is each repeat? And how many repeats? That almost looks too simple, but that's pretty much what it is. No more than that. The next thing you want to think about is how much rest. So you know how fast you want the swimmer to go. You think, how much rest do I want to give them so the physiological response to your swimmer causes the adaptation you want? So if I want them to swim, 110, I need to give enough rest that I get another 110 and another 110 or another 110. If I want ones to see how many they can do 105, then I'm going to start at 105 and I'm going to see how many they can do 2 or 3, and then the next day, maybe it'll be 4, the next day it'll be 5. These are things you have to decide once you are up to the point of how much rest. And then you need to set the intensity. So going back, what adaptation am I targeting? How long do I want the set to last? How far is each repeat? How many repeats? Then how much rest do I give? And how fast do I want them to go? And once I know all those, I convert that desired rest into a send-off interval, and now I have a set. One thing to pay attention to is all training has secondary effects. All training has secondary effects. Even though you think you're working on one thing, your body's response might be to do something else. And again, I keep going back to the whole EN3 or MVO2 max training, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. The reason is because even though you think you're getting a swimmer to hold a pace, if you're doing high VO2 max training, the body is responding in a way that some coaches don't think about, and it's starting to use fuel that you haven't planned for, and then that's going to take its toll in the rest of either your week, your macro cycle, or your season. Okay? So, some rules and ideas. Warm up really isn't about warming your body up for anything, because as I like to say, when human beings were walking on the savannah and the saber-toothed tiger came around the corner, human beings didn't go, "Oh, excuse me, Mr. Tiger, I need to stretch myself out before I run away." Boom, you were off. All right, so what warm-up is recovery from the last workout. That's why you do it, not so much to get yourself ready. Are you going to do a preset? Are you going to work a main set? In that main set, you're going to work on threshold, VO2, max, speed. What are you going to do? You sort of need to plan ahead so that you know what you're going to do. All right, and then are you going to do a warm down, which will help you to process all the fuel that you spent in that particular day. Okay, now, before I go on to like a weekly plan, I want to talk about high aerobic swimming. All right, and high aerobic swimming, or VO2 max swimming, or as you hear it called, heart rate training. Heart rate training is when you swim 30 beats below maximum with a medium amount of rest and try to hold fast times. I hesitated because I wanted to say race pace, but I hear that word used and used so incorrectly throughout my swimming life and in different countries. What I mean is, when you're trying to hold the pace that you are going to swim in the middle of your race over and over and over again with enough rest to be able to do that. So when you're doing that kind of training, you need to know that there's a cost. My general rule is you never want to do more than 30 minutes of that kind of training, and you want to have at least 48 hours and probably closer to 72 before you do that kind of training again. That's what that's what I sort of advise people, so that you don't overcook your swimmer. Usually it will be your best trainers that you will be tempted to move on and get them to go faster and faster and faster. You need to understand what energy they are spending in holding their times so that you are developing them and not overcooking them. Okay? That's my simple word for the wise. All right. Finally, I've put up there a sample plan for some distance swimmers. And this is like a, kind of a weekly thing here. This is some examples of how to write a week of training, plan for a week of training with energy systems. So Monday morning, you're going to do some EN2 and EN3, some drills and some kicking. Monday night, you're going to have recovery and speed and SP3 swimming. Tuesday, work some best stroke at the low aerobic level. And then Tuesday afternoon, you're going to do one of those sets that I just described. Heart rate training, pace training, difficult training. Wednesday morning off. Wednesday afternoon, EN1 and recovery. And that's because if you look there, I'm trying to make sure that there's adequate recovery from Tuesday night. So Wednesday's off. Wednesday afternoon is more recovery. And then even Thursday morning is still recovery and drills and EN1. Thursday afternoon, I'm to IM or best stroke swimming at higher speeds, but probably shorter distance. And I can do that at, some anaerobic work. Friday, recovery EN1 and kick. Friday afternoon, more of the same. And then my second big set is on Saturday morning. So if you really look at it, the super intensity is going to be on Tuesday afternoon, Saturday morning. Spread out nicely so that I can do, so that I can make this work the best that I can. So there's a week of training. And that takes me to the end. From this, I'm hoping that you'll be able to at least think about how to write your own workouts and or weekly plans. Now, before I get to the questions, I know that Mr. Chakshi did want to talk about racing a bit. And really, there's only one thing to say about racing, and that is this. What you need to know, or what you need to sort of understand is, in the three different kinds of energy that I talked about today, different races have different requirements. And I didn't have a slide that does this. There's a famous paper that was done probably 20 years ago where they calculated what they best thought the breakdown is. And this was these times, and what I can just sort of tell you so you can get a general idea, and maybe I can share this information that I only have here on a piece of paper. But for a 22-second 50-meter freestyle, there'll be 38% phosphogenic, ATP-CP, 58% glycolytic, and only 4% aerobic. Now that changes quickly as you get to 100 freestyle at 48 flat, 20%, 39%, 41% aerobic. So from a 50 is 4 to a 100 is 41. And that is because swimming is a very, very aerobic sport. The reason is because the water fights back at every movement you make. It is not like running. It is not like any land sport, because in land sports, gravity and inertia will continue to keep you going. In swimming, from one microsecond to the next, you are fighting in that medium and it is fighting back. So you are immediately stressing the aerobic system. And this goes all the way up 200 free at 1 minute 45, 13%, 29%, 58% aerobic. And all the way up to the 1500, if you get to 1450, it's only going to be 3%, 11%, 86%. Now, I can't remember the paper this came from, and I looked furiously on the net last night. I couldn't find it again. But it's in some famous papers that talked about energy systems. I'm sure you'll be able to find it. So knowing that, knowing the kind of energy you're going to spend in a race at certain speeds, that's when you go back to planning the workouts kind of like I planned, or like I showed you. All right, so at this point, let's have some questions. Okay, questions?
Just hang on, Chris, while we come on.
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
Yes. You want to tell me the questions? Because I can't see them.
I will, and Partha will also. We're just trying to come on because I think there's something happening.
Okay.
Here. I lost my screen. So
I'm sorry, I've been muted for a while.
Yeah, perfect. I think it's Partha.
So, yeah, I'll start with the questions. Chris, there's been some question. Some people want to know certain sets about lactic production, lactic tolerance, and peak lactate sets. And I can see there are a few questions about can you advise some set regarding recovery after doing a lactic set? What kind of recovery a swimmer should do?
Okay, after a lactate set, what I like to do is get the recovery system going. So what I usually do is I will say, if they finish the lactate set, I don't let them sit on the wall. I say, okay, push off, take 8 cycles as fast as you can, then the rest of the 50 or the rest of the 100 easy. And I might make them do 450s like that. And I might even say, okay, push off, go easy. And in the middle of the lap, take 5 cycle bursts. We call them spikes. And by doing those spikes, it starts the lactate removal going, and then the easy swimming sort of keeps it going. So I sort of mix that in. So that's the first thing I do after a hard lactate either production or tolerance set. I put some spikes in, then some easy swimming, and I sort of mix that around. So for me, I'll say they're there on the wall, they're breathing really hard. I'll say, okay, 250 spike, 200 easy, twice a rep.
Thank you. And there's been some question about some demo set regarding lactic production, lactic tolerance, and peak lactate.
What's the question?
Can you please go through some of the explanation, lactic production, lactic tolerance, and peak lactate?
Okay. Lactate production involves how much you're trying to recruit new muscle fibers. So the way that we think you do that is by getting the highest values of lactate that you can do. So that usually involves swimming at a high speed, having the lactate rise, and then letting the lactate come all the way down and doing it again. All right, so usually that'll be swims on multi-minutes of rest. Lactate tolerance involves spiking the lactate up, letting it come down a little bit or a fair amount, and then having you go again and again so that you spend the most amount of time at almost maximum lactate. Now I have to warn you, I'm going to say this. These are traditional ways of looking at lactate training, but I always like to tell the story of Michael Phelps. When Michael Phelps was 14 and he went 155 for 200 fly, I'll never forget, he touches the wall, makes the Olympic team, or 15, wherever he was, and the scientists say, oh my God, his lactate was only 8 point something. When he grows up and it becomes 19, he's going to be so great. And Bob Bowman whipped around and looked at them and said, he's never going to have lactate that high. Because the reason Michael Phelps is the greatest swimmer in the world is whoever lived was, he had the ability to get rid of lactate while he was swimming. So for him, it was the idea of clearing lactate as you swam that is the thing that divides, you know, supermen from regular swimmers. So you can make yourself produce more lactate, and you can train yourself to tolerate more lactate. But what you really want to do is train the transportation mechanisms to take lactate out of your system, and that's where modern swimming seems to be going now.
Thank you, Chris. Monal sir, would you like to put some question in?
Thank you, Partha. This is a question coming from one of our speakers who's going to be talking tomorrow, Partha Varanasi. And he says, it's a bit long question, so I'll just read it out since Chris
I know
see the
Partha, he
question.
talks a lot. What does he have to say?
Yeah. So he's asking, when the swimmers are swimming longer distances, trying to engage the lipid metabolism, will the lipid metabolism start off unless blood glycogen is depleted? We have observed a sudden rush of energy while they swim at threshold 4 by 4 into 100 at 20 bbm or even higher speeds, not doing just aerobic speeds, but higher. So
Yeah,
you need me
well,
to repeat the question?
I think I know what he means. Well, let me say this and then repeat the question again. If they're swimming at 20 beats below maximum on 4 times 200s, he's above lipid metabolism. He is spending some anaerobic energy to do that. Because it's only 4, he thinks that he's getting high aerobic swimming, but he's definitely gone beyond the oxygen barrier, in my opinion. I'm trying to think of, he's beyond fat metabolism. And this is hard for a lot of people to understand. If you start off slow and then increase the speed that you can go at the medium heart rate, that's a better way for me of getting the most out of your fat metabolism than trying to go faster and faster and faster and only doing it for a short period of time. I think that's what he means. He can write again if I've missed that.
I think you answered this question. And there's one coming from Pradeep Kumar. Can you explain how the body feels when working on each energy zone? Because all coaches will not have facilities to check lactic acid. Most of them only have the heart rate monitors.
Well, heart rate is the best way. My thing is, and also it's a mixture between heart rate and the coach's knowledge. And then after that, the swimmers start to know. So I will talk about feel. And I can say this from experience because when I coached in China, I could literally tell kids, because they have been tested so many times, I'd say, go swim 4.2 lactate, and they would do that exactly because they eventually knew how it felt. You learn that through knowing your heart rate, and then eventually from knowing your heart rate, you know what that heart rate feels like when you're swimming. That's the best way of doing it. So you want to get them to swim and get them to swim 50 beats below, 40 beats below, 30 beats below, and then even higher. And once they start to do that, they'll start to have the interoceptive network. They'll start to know what that feels like in their fingertips and in their body, and they'll know what those speeds are. But heart rate is, you're right, heart rate is the best way. Even when you have lactate testing, the best way for kids to understand what energy zone they're swimming in is to feel it. Because then when they grow up to race, they'll swim at the appropriate speeds. This isn't, everyone thinks when I'm saying this, I'm just talking about distance swimming or aerobic swimming. No. It's sprinters as well. And the way sprinters can do it is, and this is key, is I always say, if you do sprints without going underwater, if you do sprints of 25 and 35 from a surface push, and then take your heart rate from the middle of the pool, you start to learn what higher speeds are and what heart rates are. If you do 15-meter sprints, they're amazed when you first do the first 15-meter sprints, they take their heart rate, it's not that high. That's because they've used this and it hasn't cost them that much. So then they learn, oh, that's what easy speed is. Then if they do 25s or 35s without the dive or without the underwater, then they know what the next level of speed is. When they do 75s all out, they know what the next level of speed is. And then they learn that feeling. I hope that answers this question. And if not, I have one sort of superset that I think will help someone who trains speed swimmers to have the feeling of intermediate speed.
There's a question which asking, what is the set duration? Is it the sum of the work time plus the rest interval, or only the sum of the work time
It's
of,
the, well,
of that set?
on one slide, I put the length in meters of how far you swam. And when I said the other slide, I put set duration. It is the length of the time of work. So if you do 30 50s and you're swimming 30 seconds for those 50s, that's 15 minutes of work.
Thank you. Partha, you want to take the next two?
Yeah, thank you, sir. One other question is, how many lactic set would you like age grouper to do compared to a senior swimmers?
All right, here, you're gonna be sad when I tell you this. All the coaches listening to me, you don't wanna hear this, but I've gotta say it. Until puberty, there are no energy systems. Sorry. What people seem to forget this. If you're 10 or 11 or an underdeveloped 12, there is no anaerobic. There isn't. You need hormones to produce that sort of thing. So if you have 10 unders and you're making them dive and have 2 minutes rest, you're not using energy systems. They're getting the rest, but it's not the same as a grown-up does. Now, once puberty happens, then it's completely different. So for a post-pubertal swimmer, then, and when you say lactate sets, I don't really call them that. I'm pretty specific about what they say. But when I start to get 30 beats below maximum and higher, like I said, I only want to do 2 sets a week at, or maybe 3 at the most, and that they're spread apart. And I'm also having enough recovery in there, and I'm thinking about, what I see when those sets are over in terms of spreading that out and them out. Rare is me to do 3 a week. Almost, it's usually 2 and that's it.
Thank you. It was a very important thing for all the coaches. They should understand what they're supposed to do pre-puberty level swimmers and what they're supposed to do for post-puberty level swimmers, and think it's a great thought. Thank you, Chris. I think the next question is, someone is asking about fixing the dryland or strength condition plan with the weekly cycle, which got different energy system in the regular practice. So how do you put the dryland session, with different set of energy workout?
Excellent question, whoever asked that. And the answer is going to be
that has been asked by Surat Chandra.
Thank you. Well, here's the thing. If you can, you want to sort of stay on the same, the same thing. You need to think, is my dryland going to get in the way of what I'm going to do in swimming? So yeah, if your dryland coach is putting you on some kind of power thing when you're working on aerobic, it's not going to work. It won't. All right. Now, with that in mind, again, pre-puberty, there are no energy systems. So all you're really working on is general coordination and general strength going that, nature's going to take care of anyway. Once you get past puberty, when you're doing dryland, you have to plan to put your sets where they're going to work best mixed with the dryland. For example, for me, I mean, and here's the thing that no one wants to hear about. Doing dry, in a perfect world, dry land should always come after swimming. But we live in a civilized society where they have to go to school, and most people can't do that, so they do dry land before swimming. And so we all, including myself, we have to, we have to make the best of what we can do. But in a perfect world, you would do some kind of, for a speed swimmer, you'd do an anaerobic set. Then you'd go to the weight room, and the weight room would recruit new muscle fibers for the next time. You wouldn't want to reverse that around, because the weight, the strength training stuff will beat down different muscle groups perhaps than the ones you're going to use in swimming. If the strength comes after the swimming, you get extra. If the hard strength becomes before the hard speed, you might be under training some recruited fibers.
Thank you, Chris. Monal sir, would you like to put some questions?
Okay, Chris, this is a question coming from one of our ex-Olympic swimmers. He's asking, is ketosis a different kind of energy system? Recent research shows that a lot of marathoners have performed better after switching to a keto diet. How is it different from aerobic energy system?
Usually, if a swimmer is going into a ketonic state, I call the doctor. This usually means that I call it eating yourself. A ketonic state, you're eating yourself, and I think it's dangerous. Now, what I think he's reporting is what you call negative energy balance. Maybe I'm wrong, but this is what I think he's reporting with marathoners, and especially the Africans. They do not put energy into themselves when they're running a marathon, because they're calculating that they're going to lose muscle mass and its subsequent weight while they're running, and they're going to still be able to produce the same amount of power, and they're going to have a lighter load, and they're going to go faster. And this has proven to be true. And I don't know how they train for that. I'm not enough of an expert in running. But I know that they have, as he said, they have shown that people have gotten PBs and record-breaking performances from being in that state. But I personally couldn't advise that especially for a developing swimmer. That's as far as I can go with that.
Thank you, Chris. There's another question. What ratio of aerobic and anaerobic training needed for a sprinter versus a middle distance versus a long distance swimmer? Of course, we have a session on periodization and the different energy systems that will be used at different stages of the training cycle. But still, the question is something that probably also could be addressed by you from a energy systems and training perspective.
Well, like I was putting up there and sort of said before, if you're swimming a 1500 world-class male, you need 86% aerobic for the race, 11% glycolytic, and 3% phosphogenic. So you got to be training, systems for that. In a 400, it's 73% aerobic, 21% glycolytic, 6% phosphogenic. So that's kind of the ratio I'd be going for. If I have a sprinter, it's only going to be 20% of it's only going to be 41% aerobic, 39% glycolytic, and 20% phosphogenic. So if I have a 100 swimmer, it's going to look a lot different than I have a 1500 swimmer. Having said that, I always want to ask the question, how old is your swimmer? There's no such thing as a 14-year-old sprinter in my world, because the aerobic pathway has not closed. And all speeds and energy systems are added on to what they call the aerobic base, or what I call is like a house. So once that speed has completely been set as high as it can, then the anaerobic speeds are added on top of it. So, you know, I'm giving you numbers for what races require, but I'm also warning you that you cannot say, oh, you know, my swimmer is a sprinter, so they only have to go 4% aerobic and they're only 13 years old. You will not get a swimmer that is as developed as they possibly could have been if you let the aerobic window close. If you don't wait until the aerobic window is completely used up. This is different from running. In running, there's the inertia factor, but because swimming is so aerobic with every stroke, you need to take advantage of that. Hope that answers.
Last one before I pass on to Partha. What is active recovery and passive recovery, and how to add that to the sets?
Okay. Active recovery is active recovery means you do something to spur what they call the lactate transportation system. And I didn't talk about that today because I only had an hour, but this was the revolution in training of the late 70s and early 80s, where the lactate transportation system takes lactate out of your system. Active recovery sort of spurs that on. So the set that I described to you before, where you do some spikes and you do some movement to make the lactate drop. You might even do that in the middle of a set. Passive recovery means you do nothing. Passive recovery is you either just float or sit there and let your body system take down the waste products on its own. Those are the only two different things. And I guess there's not too much passive recovery going on anymore in swimming training unless you're trying to produce ever higher rates of lactate by recruiting new muscle fibers. Other than that, not so many people are using passive recovery, but when it was named, that's what it's named. Okay?
Thank you, Chris. And I think we come to the last question of the day, if not any more question from Onal sir. Can you elaborate a little more about lactate threshold, how we can measure it during the practice?
Okay. Yeah. If you don't have a lactate machine, there are 3 ways for figuring it out. I'll start with the one everybody hears of late, but that doesn't like. But if you do one 30-minute swim with your best, and really try your hardest and divide that by 30, that's the closest thing you're going to get to your anaerobic threshold. Another way of doing it is to do a 600-meter race and divide by 6. That's not as good as the 3,000, but that's usually pretty close. And then the other way is basically to do 3,100's best average on about 30 to 35 second rest if you're younger, 30 to 40 second rest if you're older. And the heart rate will be about and the average time will be about at your threshold.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chris, I'll just pose 2 questions before we wrap up. There is somebody who's asking an explanation on rested speed versus fatigue speed.
Right. What I said was, in the presentation I talked about if you were training rested speed or fatigue speed. Fatigue speed means if you're swimming 100-meter free, at 75 meters, you're tired, but you're still swimming. That's fatigue speed, last 25 speed, or middle of the race speed. Rested speed just means how much speed you have when you dive in and start going. And you can train both of those by different methods.
Thank you, Chris, for that explanation. I'll also pose one question which had come in while you were doing your presentation, and I jotted it down because it might be relevant to a lot of coaches here. There seems to be a bit of confusion on the explanations which you gave about the rested and the pace for various energy systems. A lot of them think that all this is for elite swimmers. So how to handle the things for developing swimmers. Could you just close this with a little bit of elaboration?
All right,
to
now, but
this
there's
confusion?
two different things here. And I'm going to say, one, I don't do it for elite swimmers because I'm going on the percentages required for a post-pubertal swimmer. So those numbers are the same for anyone that's over puberty. I never said times, except when I measured the percentage of each system used for like a top race. But other than that, I'm giving the paces, you determine the paces. And the heart rates are individual. And that's why I put beats below max. Beats below max, 50 beats below max, no matter if you're 16 or 25, 50 beats below max is going to be fat metabolism aerobic. 25 or 30 beats below max, no matter 16 or 25, you are now, you're at VO2 max above lactate threshold. And 10 beats below max, if you're 16 or 25, you are swimming anaerobically. All right? Now, when you say developing swimmers, if you are under puberty, none of this matters. If you're doing puberty, you aren't using energy systems. But if you are still a developing swimmer and you are post-pubertal, then these numbers matter to you. You still want to, but you need to, aerobic system has to be used both before puberty and then into puberty until that window starts to close. That's all I'm saying. So developing swimmers, you want to be as aerobic as you can, as long as you can, certainly before puberty. And then when puberty comes along, there's going to be a little bit of what they call peak height velocity. You're still going to have a growth spurt. You need to go until that aerobic window starts to close down, and then you can start to put more anaerobic work on. But, and I know people don't want to hear it, there is no 12 and under lactate tolerance. There is none. None.
Thank you, Chris. And maybe Partha will deal with this a little bit more in his periodization session. Chris, I really appreciate your patience, but we cannot wrap this up without taking this question. It's coming from a buyer who's already achieved a B time for the 2020 Tokyo, and he's asking, his name is Sajan Prakash, who's hoping to get an A cut in the extended window. He is asking, as a 200 flyer during the taper phase, we started doing high intensity lactic sets. I was not able to create more lactic acid. Is this a sign of the body unable to recover or to cut down more on aerobic part, or what is your view on this? Do you understand the question?
Oh yeah, and he's my boy. I love that kid. He's a hard worker, and what I want to say is, if you maybe do that work earlier, before the taper, it might be more effective. And then when the taper comes and you do less of the other kinds of work, those anaerobic properties will just jump up at the end. You know, a lot of people try to get into the pace at the end of the season. It's kind of too late. You want to do the pace when you're training, and then it becomes automatic when you get near the end. So if you want to produce these big lactate numbers, you want to do that, in the main training block, not at the end block. So I'm not really answering your question as to what happened, why you couldn't do something. But I do think it's because you're doing it too late. I think my guess would be that you want to be doing some of that power training earlier, and then it'll change into an easier speed when you get to your tape. And I don't want to offend anybody who trains you or anything like that. You're asking a question, I'm answering that. I'm going to pretend I didn't know you.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. And Partha, what do you think?
It was a great session. I think this topic is very important for all the Indian coaches. We should know how we are going to use the energy system without just jumping into a conclusion that we have to put a lot of lactic acid set for a sprinter or a lot of aerobic work for an early age group. So we also need to consider factors like whether they have done their, past